Hello, everyone. Blue Star Saber here once again to do another Star Wars discussion. This time on my birthday. So yeah, hello. I have my birthday today, and this time is the Mandalorian season 3 look back review, in which will be let's see. Just before I end up seeing the Mandalorian and Grogu, I'm going to discuss the Star Wars movie. The Star Wars season, and see what I think about it, and even discussing some of the fandom's reputation of this one, because as we all know, the first two seasons of The Mandalorian were well received by fans. It was all, let's see, for many people, this was like the hope they had for Star Wars after the disappointment of the sequel trilogy. It looked like a bright future on Disney Plus for the Star Wars. And then I think a few other TV shows came out, particularly Book of Boba Fett and Kenobi, which once again split the fandom on the quality of those shows, if you will. I think I showed you the reputation of the Book of Boba Fett. It didn't probably help that part of Mando's story, particularly being exiled from his, group of the Mandalorians, as well as reuniting with Grogu, ended up happening in 3 episodes of that season, taking up a bit of Boba Fett's thing, and also making it so you need to watch part of the Book of Boba Fett in order to fully understand Mando's journeys, rather than just Mando just being a cameo of coming out to help and all that stuff. So yeah. Let's see. Would season 3 be able to at least keep regardless of what the setup for season 3 was in the Book of Boba Fett, could it do well? Well, as I think we will, as I will show here, as we see here with while season 1 remained quite popular with both critics and fans, both having the same popularity. Season 2 also remaining popular with critics, maybe slightly less with fans, but only by a minor drop, really, and that's not too bad. But as we see from here, while the critics, for the most part, remained positive, the fandom became rather negative. Arguably, this is a season that split the Star Wars fandom. Oh, let me just check the Book of Boba Fett, actually. Book of Boba Fett. Rotten Tomatoes. Which, as we see with this tab, let's see, the Book of Boba Fett. No, not as hated as the Book of Boba Fett, but still quite close to this sort of negativity, if you will. So, yeah, you can see how, for many people, this season was either the seasonal rot or where the story of the Mandalorian fell off. Now, why is that? Well, we'll have to look at the episodes. The first one we reintroduced to the armorer, who, along with I believe Paz Vizsla, are doing a ceremony for a recurring Mandalorian character that we will see throughout this season, Ragnar Vizsla, which is apparently Paz Vizsla's son. We've seen that there's a lot more of the Mandalorians from the Watch that are here. Arguably, other survivors from Moff Gideon's attack on the covert, from my understanding, and maybe some other groups that have also followed the way, but didn't really interact with covert, and they managed to find each other. It's not explained too much, but there's more of a group of Mandalorians. They get attacked by the Monster of the Week, this sort of gator thing, and of course end up being saved by none other than, of course, Mando Din Djarin and Grogu in the Nebula 1 Starfighter. The armor basically tells Mando that he basically needs to, that unless he gets from the mines of Mandalore, be bathed in the waters, he is not allowed in the Covenant, which Mando is determined to do, despite the fact that everyone believes that the planet is now basically lifeless and no one can access the mines. So Mando returns to reunite with his fretzy friend Grief Karga, who's now become High Magistrate of Navarro, if you will. requesting like a bit of aid. Let's see, Grief Karga offers like Din Djarin a place to live here and become like the new marshal because Cara Dune's character, who is portrayed by Gina Carano, has been written out of the season, doing jobs for the New Republic, if you will. Partly because, well, Gina Carano could not shut her mouth with controversy that, let's see, made Disney uncomfortable. As a result, they had to rip her out. So he's trying to offer Mando to take her place, if you will. But Mando wants to try and become back a part of his religion, if you will. Instead, he asks if they could possibly rebuild IG-11. So this would probably be one of the most controversial aspects of this season, I think. Trying to bring back a character who had quite the fitting end and finale of death, if you will. But let's see, they get those sort of like mini, let's see, hold on. Rise of Skywalker mini aliens. Oh, and alien. They get a group of these Anazalians who most people might remember from like the Rise of Skywalker, if you will, probably. Let's see. The only reference to like that movie, I think, that you see in The Mandalorian, but still. They attempt to repair him, but he's gone back to his old droid thing, so Mando can't really use him yet, but they're going to try and see what they can do to bring him back with droid parts and all that. So he eventually, before he leaves, he ends up encountering a pirate by the name of Van, who is causing trouble. And he works for this man here, Goran Shard, who is Pirate King. After a bit of a scuffle, Mando is able to escape, and as a result, heads to like one of the moons of Mandalore, where we find Bo-Katan there, who is basically by herself now, except for like a droid assistant, because all the Mandalorians that we saw from like apparently her forces had abandoned her. Din Djarin was offering service, but she's basically become deluded, and since she doesn't have the Darksaber and he does, as a result, she refuses to help Mando, which arguably for some people was a bit of a surprise that she wasn't, trying to challenge Mando for the Darksaber, as that felt like that was what was building up with the end of season 2 as like the conflict for like next season where Bo and Mando have taken place. And I will probably say Bo-Katan has ended up becoming like the added main character. It's like Mando and Grogu's episode or show, if you will. So yeah, you kind of like she's added as a third character, which I'm not against it. See a show adding more main characters, at least for like, even if it's just for one season. So I figured that was like a nice little touch. But yeah, so Mando, getting no help from her, ends up going to an old friend, Pelimoto, as we see, has been scamming some Boonta Eve, visitors and all that stuff with parts, with like Jawas. Mando hires her to like get try and help Butsi find parts for IG-11. Granted, they don't have the parts necessary at the time, but she offers to her the droid R5D4, who you might remember from A New Hope here, to be like the droid that helps navigate in the Nebulon thing, where they go to like Mandalore, if you will. They find out the planet is basically is Nazi breathable, and it's not disastrous. And as they're fighting a bunch of monsters or some savage creatures that have been reawakened from the bombings of Mandalore, if you will. Eventually, Din Djarin gets attacked and captured by this sort of cyborgy like alien monster that looks like he's about to cook and eat him, which results in Grogu here going to Bo-Katan to save him, in which she uses the Darksaber to slice him, showing that she's much more suited for the weapon, really, if you will. And let's see, Mando ends up being bathed in the waters, where he falls deep in. Bo-Katan dives in to save him, but ends up seeing the legendary Mythosaurus for Mandalorians, in which, for those who do not know, that is the species in which the Mandalorian symbol is based off of. It is very important to their culture. So that's how the second episode ends, leading her quite an interesting detail of where this is going to go, where this is going to lead, if you will. Given the fact that Mando's quest now appears to be done, which some people thought was way too soon, which I'll get to more on that a bit later. But we end up Mando, and in the next episode, Bo-Katan end up fighting a bunch of Imperial starfighters. Her castle gets destroyed. She basically has no home left, and ends up going with Mando to the Covenant, which I will cover in a bit. But for this episode, we mostly follow Penn Pershing as we see how he's adapted to the New Republic, their amnesty program, if you will. Talking of experience, we see New Republic senators and politicians showing that they're still just as corrupt as they were during the Old Republic's age, which is, I think, a bit disappointing in some regards, that there's nothing that they've learned. But given how the rise of the sequel trilogy had basically had the New Republic easily collapse against the First Order, it's really no surprise. So, but yeah, so it's a bit disappointing, I guess. To see nothing has changed, but given what Disney did with the sequel trilogy, it's not really surprising, if you will. So, yeah, but during there, we also see Ellie Kane, who was like Moff Gideon's like Lord Imperius, we might have seen in the second season. She apparently seems to have turned a new leaf. You try and see her trying to bond with let's see, Dr. Pensing, if you will, showing him like the one surface part of Carson, that kind of like that's active, all that stuff. She ends up asking about his research, in which Betsy Penn Pershing wishes that he could continue because there is some good stuff he could have done with that cloning. Eventually, he decides to take her off and off of trying to find it. They manage to like sneak aboard an Imperial vessel, but then he ends up getting captured by the New Republic, and it's revealed that Ellie Kane has sold him out. He's supposed to get some sort of like a memory program thing that I think is actually a memory wiper, but to the New Republic, they say they've just soothed it down to something that just relieves pain or like trauma things, if you will. But Elliot Kane turns it up to like maximum, seemingly to damage his mind. So we got that. Anyway, Mando, of course, ends up turning to the Covenant, where greeted by Paz Vizsla. He does not quite believe that he's bathed in the waters just yet, with taking them both to the armorer, who inspects the water, confirming that the waters are, from like the mines of Mandalore, allowing Din Djarin back into the Covenant. But also we learn that since Bo-Katan also technically dived in, she is also accepted into the Covenant since she has not removed her head. Bo-Katan first protests, but arguably, relents, if you will, arguably probably because she has nowhere else to go, given the fact that her own followers abandoned her. Her home castle has been destroyed now. Arguably, she has nowhere else in this, which is a development I don't think anyone sort of expected this season, but leads to the next sort of like free set of episodes in which you see Bo-Katan adjust to like Mandalorian, like the Covenant's cultures, if you will, and interacting, if you will. Like, for example, you see like this first episode where we see Mandalorians training with particularly Ragnar Vizsla doing quite well against other like foundlings or students or apprentices, if you will, with oops, that's my alarm. Mando encouraging Grogu to take part, which everyone's thinking, yeah, it doesn't look like he would do well given how small he is and doesn't move him much, and he gets 2 shots fired on him, but then of course using his sort of Yoda-like mobility, ends up doing the 3 shots against Ragnar, who, just as that sort of training happens, if you will, gets captured by the sort of like bird raptor-like monster, if you will, which leads to a chase, if you will. Paz Vizsla, of course, is quite distressed. So Bo-Katan with her ship was the closest that was able to follow it because they couldn't keep up with jetpacks. So along with her and whoops, I've accidentally just shared. Hold on, let me just give me a sec there. Let's see, her, Mando, Paz Vizsla. Let's see, agree to go on. Grogu once he was like is left behind with the armorer, in which she ends up talking about, let's see, like Foundlands and like her past and like how you learn to become a Mandalorian, and we're doing some forging for like a new bit of armor for Din Djarin, let's see, for Grogu, if you will. We end up getting like Grogu's flashback view from Order 66, which we saw briefly in the Book of Boba Fett, but we learn that the Jedi Knight Kellarian Baku, who you might know from the, let's see, Star Wars Jedi Temple Challenge, ended up, this actor, of course, the character is portrayed by Ahmed Best, the man who portrayed the Jar Jar Binks, who many you might remember as like the infamous comic side character in the Phantom Menace that split the Star Wars fandom at the time, though arguably not to the level as like what the sequel trilogy did, but let's see, but yeah, but after like many years of being sort of like hated on by the character and even like considering taking his own life, Star Wars fans have calmed down a bit, with particularly the hatred of Jar Jar, partly because they either hate other characters or at least they learned what Ahmed Best went through and have become a bit more supportive of him. Some might because of the whole Darth Jar Jar theory, or because he remains a good sport, and also that he's got to now play as a Jedi character. So yeah, I think that's kind of nice to see, if you will. He got help from like Naboo guards, if you will, and they managed to escape in one of the Naboo cruisers. So yeah, Grogu gets his armor while we see Bo-Katan adjusting to like the new Mandalorian, let's see, Watcher's way of life, such as everyone's seeing how they end up eating, with everyone going from place to find. But since she's leading the group, she gets to eat by the campfire, sort of taking her time to like adjust to a new situation. Eventually, they find the nest. Paz Vizsla first tries to like go in first to get his son, but turns out that it's about 3 baby birds, if you will, that are being waiting to be fed Ragnar himself. Eventually, a bit of a chase involves, let's see, with Din Djarin and Bo-Katan against the monster. It ends up falling into like the water and gets eaten by another one of those crocodile monsters. The groups end up taking them back. Let's see, the Ragnar back to the armorer, as well as those 3 baby birds to be served as foundlings, since, well, they basically killed the mother, so it's like they have no one else but to look after them, which she seems fine with, which I'm curious how they're able to sort that. But the armorer ends up noticing that Bo-Katan has some of her armor sort of taken off, if you will, so offers to like add a new bit of shoulder thing, which she ends up offering for Minnesota, talking about how she saw it. Now, at first, I will admit, when I first saw this, I thought the armor didn't seem to actually believe her, but it seems like it was considering what Bo-Katan ended up saying. It's implying when you're very lucky, but arguably she's at first doesn't think because at first she says only in legends, but then when Bo-Katan admits that she thinks she saw one, she only says then you're lucky. But it seems to me that she was perhaps pondering on those words as what this might mean for Mandalore, as we saw with the next episode, where we cut back, of course, to Greef Karga's people. They're having a nice, peaceful time, trying to like build new trading routes and stuff, but they end up being attacked by Van and, well, let's see, Goran Shard, if you will, pirates causing like trouble for like Mandalore. Let's see, causing trouble for like let's see, Greef Karga due to the events of what happened in the first episode of the season. And unfortunately for Greef Karga, Navarro is not a part of the New Republic. It's an independent world, so they don't really have the resources to go after them. Of course, he ends up contacting. Let's see. Oh, not that one. Let's see. Carson Taver, if you will. Carson Taver, if you will, who tries to get his superiors to help the people of Navarro, thinking that this might be a larger ploy by the Empire using pirates. But Ellie Kane sort of steps in, pointing out Navarro as a neutral world. Clearly, arguably not, directly sabotaging it, but giving sly nods of like, what's going on, which Pellimore, on the Carson Teva does not actually trust her, but due to the last episode, she's been regarded as an outstanding member of the program. So yeah, with no option of getting the New Republic in, Carson Teva ends up resorting to the other person he thinks that would be willing to help. Grief Karga, which is, of course, the Mandalorian, Din Djarin, the Watcher. Of course, he is greeted hostilely by Mandalorians, such as Paz Vizsla, because, well, he's a New Republic and they're not welcome. It's revealed that the reason that he was able to find them was because R5 served in rebellion. I was able to allowed him to track him to this place. Which means that they have to move, or as Paz tries to suggest, killing him. But Din Djarin says that this guy can't be a break, so I'm saying I think we should let him off this once. But Carson Teva ends up revealing to Mando that your friend's in trouble, pirates. I figured you would want to try and do something to help. Bo-Katan seems to be willing to help Mando do it, but Mando, of course, needs to get the rest of the Covenant to approve, telling them that he got the offer that Grief Karga offered him, and while they may have had some past conflict with him, it was not necessarily his forces of bounty hunters and mercenaries that damaged the Covenant. It was the Imperials, and now they've got a chance to live out in the open again. Waiting to see how the others would decide. Paz Vizsla sort of comes in, if you will, and talks about all the sort of things that the losses they have, what this Grief Karga did, and wondering why should we risk our lives further. As he then surprises everyone by saying because we're Mandalorians, and despite his conflicts with Din Djarin, he saved his son's life, and now he's saying that he now has the chance of us offering a future for Mandalorians, a brighter future, and that's why we should do this. Which results in the Mandalorians, agreeing to team up. The mission ends up being led by, of course, Bo-Katan, if you will, who will use the drop ship for the majority of the Mandalorians, while her and Din Djarin, if you will, who fight, the starfighters and ships of the pirates. You see the Mandalorians, clash with the pirates down below. Paz Vizsla, of course, gets a bunch of shots in and all that stuff, taking a few of them out. And the armor ends up helping as well a bit, knocking out this Trandoshan that had a cannon that was actually shooting and actually damaging or maybe even killing one or two of the Mandalorians, if you will. While Bo-Katan, and the Mando end up fighting the space pirates, if you will, and where we see the pirate Van chasing Mando for a bit, but as more and more starfighters end up being destroyed, he sort of abandons Gorian Shard, if you will, and flies off, which we will only see him again in sort of a cameo minor role as one of the pirates in the Skeleton Crew show, if you will. So he's one of the only background characters that you might remember off by heart just because he was in The Mandalorian, which arguably he didn't really do much, which was a bit surprising because it felt like this character might have at least been one of the more major pirate crew members that heard some stuff throughout the thing, but I don't know. I guess it's just like a little bit of small world building. It's like, oh, this guy was in the Mandalorian, so. But yeah, but we see. Oops. Let's see. Goran Shad here, if you will. He is. Let's see. Throughout the episode, his engine's getting blasted. He gets more and more mad, especially when his first mate betrays them. And even when it's like his crew tells him that we should probably retreat, he ends up just blowing it up, if you will, just the ship. And let's see, we're trying to take, let's see, we're not blowing up the ship himself, but trying to blow up the city, if you will. But Mando and Bo-Katan easily take him down, and he crashes to his death, which I will admit, it was a bit quick how this guy got taken out. Granted, I don't think this guy was going to be anyone's favorite because, let's see, while I can see what he represents, I think his design, some might feel a bit too goofy for the Mandalorian now. I'm not saying that you would get a goofy Star Wars design like this, but I think most people thought, I wouldn't be surprised if most people thought this was too goofy of a design. But yeah, arguably, I thought this guy was going to be a bit more of a recurring villain this season, but yeah, it was only in 2 episodes, so I don't know. But yeah. Anyway, we get Grief Karga thanking the Mandalorians, offering them land, and the armorer has Bo-Katan coming to them and talking about, like, first talking a bit about the Forges of Mandalore, and then she asks Bo-Katan to remove the helmet, and which first surprises Bo, but let's see, the armor reveals that. Let's see, since she has walked both, let's see, different types of paths of Mandalore, those who remove the helmet and those that have, she believes that she can unite the Mandalorians, especially now that she's seen the Mythosaurus. Revealing that, of course, she did seem to, like, after a bit of thought on it, seems to believe her and believe that, as a result, she is perhaps, let's see, this is a sign that she is fitting to unite the Mandalorians and lead them to a brighter future, which, of course, surprises the other Mandalorians that she has removed her helmet, but she ends up, but Din Djarin is willing to go with her to try and find, like, Din Djarin is offering to both find, let's see, her Mandalorians, in which we end up seeing Axe Wolves and Costco Reeves again, as they are, let's see, using the sort of Imperial Dreadnought, Imperial Starship of Moff Gideon from last one to pursue this Quarren captain who has taken, like, this royal, let's see, Mon Calamari's son, if you will. I think we saw him briefly in a cameo in the 3rd episode of the 1st season as, like, the next job man was going to do before going back for Grogu. Apparently they were lovers, but the prince's father, if you will, or nobleman's father, the viceroy or something, was not happy, and she's not willing to risk, let's see, her crew's life, so reluctantly does so. So, yeah, which many people thought this little bit was kind of pointless. I'm not sure if this was supposed to be a sort of sign of, like, let's see, species conflict with Quarren and Mon Calamari, sort of mirroring, like, that of Mandalorians and the different factions. But at the very least, was just to show what the Mandalorians have done. Either way, some found it a bit too goofy, if you will. So, yeah, so you get Mando's character, Mando, Grogu, and Bo-Katan to this, like, planet which we have never seen. Seemingly looks like a bit of a utopia. Let's see, making well with droids, and it's led by arguably probably the 2 most controversial characters introduced to the Mandalorian, Captain Bombardier, but that, of course, portrayed by the actor, comedian Jack Black, if you will, from what you can probably see here. And apparently the Duchess, his wife, who was royalty that was elected for democracy, if you will, but of Plazaro 15, who was apparently played by the actress Lizzo. I don't know much of her work, but yeah, but these two actors would, like, feels like for most Star Wars fans, this was like so let's see, just feel too out of there, if you will. Doesn't really feel like Star Wars characters, and it feels like just Jack Black once again playing himself. So it put a lot of people off of just how goofy them are and all that stuff. So that caused a bit of a thing. But droids have been malfunctioning and all that stuff. The droids are basically, we learn throughout this episode, basically do a bit of all the work, if you will. And let's see why the others just do what they like, but the droids are starting to malfunction. As a result, they want, let's see, this to be taken care of by outside forces because, well, they can't bring their own mercenaries, which they hired Axe Wolf's group in because, well, Jack Black's character was a former Imperial, and so not really much weapons. And as a result, let's see, some hired Britsy people, and using sort of like, since Bo-Katan's technically regards the leader of Mandalore, if you will, they can try and use this as a way of like helping recognize Mandalore sovereignty and all that stuff down the line. So Din Djarin and Bo agree to search this. They meet the head of security, seeing all the droids, do a sort of cop investigation, checking out droids, particularly super battle droids, and they were, let's see, having a chase with one. Then eventually go into this bar, where it's revealed that the droids want to help because they're given a chance on this planet, and they don't mind doing services for the humans here, so long as they get to live. Because especially the battle droids, because if they are to be replaced by humans and they're no longer trusted, they'll be dismantled. So you can see this is a sort of droid survival kind of thing there. They eventually, using these sort of oil thing, they discover some sort of nanobots rewiring, and apparently the captain is behind it, if you will, of the security guard. They confront him. It's revealed that he's a separatist that served under Count Dooku. Let's see, of course, he gets a bit distracted by his long-winded speech, so he gets taken out by Bo-Katan, eventually taking them both back to, like, Jack Black's character and Lizzo's, who are a bit shocked by this trail, but offer him a chance of redemption, but first must be exiled to one of the moons. And apparently, Lizzo's character knights Grogu, if you will, and they offer, like, Bo-Katan and Din Djarin to go meet with their Mandalorians, in which, let's see, they're into to Axe Wolf, who has now become in charge, of course, but let's see, likes position, refuses to, let's see, submit to Bo-Katan, so they fight a bit. Bo-Katan eventually wins, but he still sort of like refuses to recognize as really a leader because she does not have the Darksaber, and Bo-Katan ends up getting the Darksaber from Din Djarin, but by Ritzy doing a sort of loophole, if you will, by saying he got captured, lost the saber, and Bo-Katan came in, took the saber, and defeated her captor. So they're saying, does that mean by your traditions that she is the rightful bearer? In which they seem to agree with this. And this was controversial for many Star Wars fans in this episode. And besides the Jack Black thing, why they probably dislike it, because it felt like this season was building up to like the Mando, Bo-Katan, and Djarin sort of like conflict, but no, they never actually ended up fighting, and Mando found a technicality to allow Bo-Katan the Darksaber again. Meanwhile, while this is going on, though, granted this might have actually been the previous episode, I forgot where it was. I believe Carson Tevra ends up investigating it's the Imperial shuttle, now become a Republic one, that was transporting Moff Gideon, and revealed that, he's been let free and all the crew's been killed. And apparently there's a scrap of Mandalorian armor or Beskar armor, implying that somehow Mandalorians were involved, though. As he probably knows, the Mandalorians would not actually help Moff Gideon. So, yeah. So, gives you an idea here, given the history. So, yeah, there's sort of like build up to there, revealing that Moff Gideon is back, which I think was actually in the episode before this one. But, yeah. So, we get... next episode reveals that Ellie and Kane is still actually working for Moff Gideon, just being a sort of spy here, informing him that Navarro was rescued by the Mandalorians, and all that, as he realizes that Moff Gideon realizes that the Mandalorians are working together. He has a bit of an Imperial Council where you see Captain Pelion, who, for Star Wars Legends fans know, was Thrawn's right-hand man, who then later came to serve, the Galactic Federation of Alliances, and ends up being like one of the decent Imperial leaders that actually seeks peace with the New Republic, and then of course becomes part of the Galactic Alliance before eventually being killed by Jason Solo's apprentice after refusing to join forces with him and all that stuff. So that's just a brief summary. There's a bit more details there I've left out, but you get the idea. But he is saying that they need to wait for Thrawn to return. The Imperial Council's like what to do and all that stuff, accusing others of like cloning and all that stuff, particularly Moff Gideon, which he denies. But there's other ones that are trying to do Project Shadow Necromancer, which is arguably probably referencing what happens with Palpatine in The Rise of Skywalker, all that kind of details, if you will. So, but eventually Moff Gideon reveals that the Mandalorians are, trying to retake their world, so he ends up getting the resources he needs, starfighters and bombers, as well as 3 members of the Praetorian Guards, if you will. So, yeah, as a result, afterwards we see the next part of the episode, and where the Mandalorians under Bo-Katan have arrived. At first panicking the citizens of Navarro, but Grief Karga shows one of the droids that no, you can see that it's Mandalorian, and we end up seeing Axe Wolves and Cosca Reeves interacting, meeting like Mandalorians like Paz Vizsla. You can see some sort of tension there as of given the history of these characters, but the armorer breaks tensions by offering like service of camp. You see like them making plans of like how to retake Mandalore, like a group of scouts. Din Djarin, Paz Vizsla, Axe Wolves and Cosca Reeves agree to do this. Meanwhile, Mando gets a gift from Grief Karga, a bit of wine, as well as a IG-12 bodysuit, if you will, for Grogu to pilot, which Mando is at first not happy with, but Grogu loves it and able to use like the button of no, yes to say for actions he wants to do. So causing a bit of trouble for Mando for that moment, but nevertheless they end up agreeing to go. The armor also goes to the surface, and they end up meeting some survivors there who still in service of Bo-Katan, but talk about how they never surrendered, but Bo-Katan confesses to like the group that she did actually surrender, and like it looked like nothing could stop the Empire from bombing them. She offered the Darksaber in exchange for that they spare the cities, which she really had no choice in the matter, given how there's no stopping them at this point, but Moff Gideon went back on his word and continued to bomb them anyway, and she feels like she's a bit of a fraud. But Mando ends up assuring her, in fact, reveals that he is loyal to her regardless if she has the Darksaber or not, because at first he was believed that she was being selfish or not, but realizes that she was trying to do the best for the Mandalorian people. So after a bit of adventures on the surface, the armor takes back the sick Mandos that are part of the group back to the ships, if you will, while the rest explore, attacking from Monster. And we've got a Bipolobodist 122 says, when you're making another No Saku podcast with Chat Blue. Okay, this is not really a Star Wars related question, but I will answer this. I have something in mind with her, and I am going to hopefully do it at some point. But at the moment, it's not going to probably happen for a while. And I've got this other Naruto stream I want to do first. But I do have something in mind with chat. I just have to wait for her to be available to do it, because let's see, she's got her own projects, and I think there's also sometimes the occasional stuff with her health that has affected times when we could have done this one sooner, but it didn't happen. But I've got something in mind, but not at the moment, I would say. Let's see. Please inform it in a post in advance so I binge watch it, please. Okay, fine. But for the time being, enjoy this discussion I'm doing of The Mandalorian. So, yeah, Din Djarin, let's see, doesn't mind what happened between them in the past. So they explore the planet, end up fighting a bunch of monsters. Well, one monster destroys the carrier ship they were on, if you will. And the Mandalorians go to like the Great Forge. They get ambushed by basically Imperial. Let me just find it. Let's see, Imperial Mandalorians. Let's see, Stormtroopers with like Mandalorian armor here, as we can see. A bit of fighting. They're eventually making them sort of like evenly matched. Some of the Mandos die, but more of the Stormtroopers die just because the Mandalorians are better fighters. Eventually, they get ambushed by Moff Gideon, who has like this new Dark Trooper phase armor with Mandalorian armor, saying that it's now complete with him in it, if you will. So basically sort of completing the sort of Darth Vader vibe look that, let's see, many people thought about when you had the season begin. Let's see, Din Djarin gets captured, if you will, with the other Mandos that were like stuck behind the wall end up being killed. And Mando and let's see, Moff Gideon tells Bo-Katan to surrender the Darksaber, but she refuses, using it to help the other Mandalorians escape. With Paz Vizsla, if you will, staying behind to take out as many of the Stormtroopers and covering them as he can, but he ends up defeating the majority of Stormtroopers, but then the Praetorian Guards arrive, 3 of them. He does as good a fight as he can, but he's no match for like them all ganging up on him, and he ends up dying as a result, which arguably I'd say this is probably the best episode of the season, just because of the sort of let's see, just how you see the two groups getting together, because, well, I probably forgot to mention during the episode, we see Paz. Hold on. Where is it? Sometimes I accidentally close it. Damn it. History. No, I didn't close it, I think. Oh, yeah. Let's see. It's still sharing it. No, Paz Vizsla ends up clashing with Axe Wolf over something like a sort of like chess game they're playing, if you will, and Grogu stops them from fighting. So you saw stuff like that, but also you saw Moff Gideon return, how he's built up his forces, and also the sort of tragic end of Paz Vizsla's death, which I understand that some were not happy about, but others I thought like defended it, saying like this is like a cool way to go out, if you will. If the character dies, this is not a bad way to go out. So you basically have like Mando dead, if you will. Let's see, Mando captured. He ends up eventually breaking free. Grogu ends up helping him after going through a bunch of forces. They end up going for Moff Gideon's clones are, and they end up destroying them, which arguably was a bit anticlimactic. And we learned that Moff Gideon, it was basically goal was to combine parts of Jedi, Mandalorian, and Imperial. Basically, him as the Imperial test subject, him with the Force, with Mandalorian armor, creating like the perfect soldiers to that would bring order to the galaxy. A bit corny of a motivation, but I can see how he would find himself as like the perfect person to be that, given the sort of ego he seems to have of himself. Though whether or not these clones will work, I don't know. But since they got like taken out, we do not know. So, but yeah, so Mando and Gideon fight, but throughout the other episode, you have Bo-Katan trying to lead the other Mandalorians from not being killed, if you will. Well, eventually, Axe Wolf Ritzy is able to like inform the Armorer and the other Mandalorians that they're under attack and about to be bombed by bombers. So they all see all the forces flee except for the cruise ship with Axe Wolf in it. That's going to be using it to crash down on the Imperial forces. So Bo-Katan and the Armorer lead a bunch of forces of Mandalorians. There was a bit of a break where we see a nice grassy area where there's a chance to show Mandalorian can refertilize, as the survivors were trying to do that here. So after a bit of a charging, Bo-Katan ends up fighting Moff Gideon for a bit when Grogu gets cornered by the Praetorian guards and Mando goes to help him. Moff Gideon destroys the Darksaber from Bo-Katan, but the combined efforts of Din Djarin and Bo-Katan and Grogu, who uses the Force, who also stopped the Praetorian guards a bit with the Force. That's how Mando's able to beat them. And as the Imperial ship that the Mandalorian stole crashes in, he gets caught in the explosion of that and dies, which arguably was pretty anticlimactic with the way they shot it with the screaming arms. It feels like he could have avoided that. If anything, I would have probably preferred if they if Grogu after a bit of teaming up with Grogu and force push him just before the ship falls and then it whacks him down, leading his to death. I feel like that would have been better. So, yeah. But anyway, the Mandalorians have their planet back. Ragnar Vizsla, who we don't see his ever reaction to his father's death, is properly bathed by the armor and all that stuff, is fully become Mandalorian. Mando officially adopts Grogu as Din Grogu so he can become his apprentice. Let's see, since he can't quite talk the creed yet, and then I must go out to hunting like they both do to the one who taught him the ways of the Mandalorian before. And we see that both Bo-Katan and the Armorer working together now, leading the Mandalorians to restart the Great Forge and begin rebuilding their civilization, with a lot more Mandalorians showing up, probably as word got back that they probably retook Mandalore. And then, of course, we see Mando go to... let me just find the character. Karen Tessant asking for work to help take down Imperial warlords in the Outer Rim, which, the New Republic don't have resources to. Says it wouldn't be really accepted officially, but he'll do it off record, if you will. And asks for an IG-11 head that they saw amongst the trophies of the New Republic forces there. I should mention during this episode, during the course of the show, you got a cameo of Sebeb. Let's see, of Sebeb from Star Wars Rebels. I should probably let's see, this character here, if you will. He was then I think the fifth episode, if you will, but yeah, you got that episode, he saw a cameo. Then I think you saw Dave Filoni cameo at the end there. But they took the IG-11 head, and he becomes the new Marshal with of Navarra, with Grief Karga welcoming Mando, finally giving his land. And the sort of episode ends with Mando relaxing this new land as Grogu's using the Force to lift a frog, which he normally does. I'm not sure he's going to eat it, but that sort of ends the episode. So, yeah. Arguably, I will admit, I gave a bit too long of a summary on the season, so I'm now going to give my thoughts on the episode. I think you've got bits and pieces throughout my summary, so yeah. Arguably, this season of Mandalorian is divisive, and I can see why. I will say this. I think some of these episodes individually are pretty good or pretty fun. I'd say for me the two best episodes are the third episode and the seventh episode. Third episode because we get a bit of that sort of New Republic world building, if you will. I think some people compare it to Andor in some regards to that, where we get to see how the New Republic sort of functions a little bit, particularly with how it's on this amnesty program with former Imperials who have reformed. Now, arguably, most of them are happy to be here, but it also shows how the New Republic refused to use any of some of the resources that they deemed too extreme or illegal, and how they dismantled the Imperial Star Destroyers and all that stuff. Particularly with the doctors cloning thing, and we see from the reason why he got into cloning in the first place was because he wanted to create organ parts to help people that needed them and all that stuff. For example, his mother, who died very young. As a result, it's like he sort of like represents that sort of like scientist thing, where scientist tragedy of like many scientists come and create stuff for noble intentions, but arguably need funding and the resources, so they end up having to work with, say, like corrupt or militaries that only want to use their science to create deadly weapons. As a result, he never got to properly use his cloning for like good reason, the good noble reasons that he wanted to do. But as a result, it was used to make cloning weapons and soldiers, if you will, rather than creating cloning parts that the Kaminoans would have done with like helping the sick and poor, if you will. So his story and backstory is arguably a bit tragic of that with the scientist, and now that he's free from like the Empire's weaponry thing, he can't actually sort of, do the sort of like New Republic can't do the cloning because the New Republic has forbidden it, given which arguably you can kind of see how the New Republic decided to stop cloning, given how it was clear how Palpatine manipulated clones to create a war between the Separatists and the Old Republic, if you will, to clash against each other. So and use that army to then wipe out the Jedi, arguably eliminating the protectors that would have prevented the rise of the Empire, if you will. So in some case, you can see why they're doing that, but arguably, if cloning was used in the right hands, if you will, like what Dr. Pershing was hoping to do with like cloning for organs, you can see why it would be a good thing. You can see why he's a bit frustrated and how Grand Moff's loyal lieutenant, if you will, was able to like goad him to actually risk his amnesty, if you will, to try and do this, which arguably the tragedy is that he was set up and framed, arguably so to make sure that his research would not be used by the New Republic. Granted, in the tragedy, he had seemingly got his mind erased. Now, granted, I say, while this episode is good, the biggest problem, because while I will admit I do like the world building, such as seeing like the one organic surface part of the New Republic with that stone thing there, actually getting to explore Coruscant a bit, so yeah. And also even seeing how New Republic senators and politicians were like, clearly much has not changed, and some of them can't tell the difference between the Empire and the Republic, as some avoided drafting, if you will. So, but yeah, so it shows, so you can kind of see how the New Republic has also kind of become ineffective by the time of the sequel trilogy, with some of these aristocrats haven't really changed their behaviors. So all that stuff is good, but arguably it doesn't feel like the events of this episode lasted long term. The only thing that's really long term is that Moff Gideon's aide did this to sabotage to gain more favor with the New Republic by making Dr. Pershing make them think that they failed with him with the sort of amnesty program, but she's a success, which maybe allows her to be more trusted, and undermine the New Republic from within. But she only gets like one little cameo at the beginning of this two-part finale, if you will, with informing being like Moff Gideon's spy, but that's basically it. And also doesn't help that she's never exposed, or she never plays a more major role after that. And now that Moff Gideon is gone, you've got to wonder what's going to happen to this character, because it's like her boss is dead, and who does she serve now? Is she going to serve one of the other Imperial warlords? Because we do get some cameos of like Moff Gideon, Captain Pelion, who will probably play more of a role in Ahsoka, arguably season 2. So now that Thrawn's back, as this season is sort of building up the return of Thrawn as like the last one did. Well, no one knows where he is at the moment. And also, besides Thrawn, I believe we do get a cameo. One of the other Imperials that we see in like the meeting, if you will, is it's going to be one of the Imperial Moffs that we see in the Mandalorian and Grogu movie. So that's a little interesting bit of foreshadowing and building up for the next season, if you will, or movie. But like I said, well, this episode is pretty good in isolation, seeing the New Republic stuff. Overall, it doesn't really add much to the overall storyline for the season, except for like the beginning parts of it, where Bo-Katan has lost her home and then goes with Mando to become a part of the Covenant, if you will. So, yeah, that part is, which is like building up to the next few episodes. So that part is least interesting, but yeah. But it's like an episode of like kept following a side character we know, the Mandalorian, which arguably an interesting storyline, but one that doesn't really add much to the overall season, which for some people was a bit of a problem with like how many of these one-off episode adventures don't feel like they add much to like the overall story, like how some of the other season episodes did, such as like say how Mando sort of like helped like these farmers defend themselves and would have left Grogu to stay here if not for a bounty hunter showing up at the end. Also introducing Cara Dune and like the other episode afterwards, while introducing Fennec Shan, who would play a role in like, of course, season 2 and the Book of Boba Fett, that kind of stuff, as well as even the heist episode where you get introduced to Mayfield and the assassin droids Robot had used in another episode. So kind of stuff like that. It doesn't really feel like this episode, while enjoyable for like New Republic world building, doesn't really feel like it helps much with the Mandalorians besides maybe the beginning and the end part. Now, the 7th episode, I say, is arguably the best episode because you got the two tribes of Mandalorians coming together, trying to put aside their differences. You can see the tension with when Bo-Katan's Mandalorians, Night Owls and mercenaries, if you will, remove their helmets. And for the Watch, Mandalorians, this is sacrilegious, if you will, but able to keep the peace, partly because the armor is helping Bo-Katan keep the tension and all that stuff. So you get that, and also Mandalorians like Din Djarin are willing to help, despite like some like Axe Wolf and Paz Vizsla. Both Mandalorians of egos have like challenged both Din Djarin and Bo-Katan to leadership by dueling them at some point. Ends up fighting each other over a petty game of chess, so you can see like the tension with Mandalorians there. But we also get some moments where we learn more of how Bo-Katan lost the Darksaber by surrendering it after, as like the only way that she could see of stopping the bombardment after when Moff Gideon gave her the offer, but of course didn't. So she does feel unworthy. But we get like a nice moment with Din Djarin saying that why he's following her, because it turns out she does. She did everything she could to protect the Mandalorians, and thinks that's why he thinks that she's a good leader and would follow her regardless if she had the Darksaber or not. Until they reclaim Mandalore, so you got that. And also, of course, you got Moff Gideon being quite a bit of a threat as well, with like these Imperial stormtroopers with Mandalorian armor. As the Mandalorians throughout the show kind of seemed, exception of maybe fighting giant monsters, seemed like they're able to easily gun down any pirate or mercenary that crossed their path. So yeah, it was nice to see some casualties and arguably a very epic death with like Paz Vizsla, which arguably some are like, oh, this is such a cool character, why are you killing him off? But I think arguably this is how you build suspense, by killing, a good character. And I think arguably they've probably done everything they can with Paz Vizsla, which I would say is quite a nice, decent character arc where, of course, we know that he's hostile to Din Djarin. We've seen that in previous episodes. But there are times that he's willing to get along, I guess, just for the greater good of Mandalorians, but doesn't really accept him too much and doesn't really like him much. But after he is bathed in the waters of Mandalorian again, and he welcomes him back, ends up trusting him once Din Djarin ends up and Bo-Katan end up rescuing his son, and you can see that with the 5th episode when he encourages Mandalorians that let's go help Greef Karga after despite the past hostilities, because Din Djarin suggested this in the future. And I like the twist where at first it feels like he's opposing it, but no, it's actually he's on board with doing this because he's now come to trust in Jaren and sees the brighter future they have at the time. So, yeah, I do like how he ends up sacrificing himself for like Bo-Katan and the others to escape to show that, let's see, he's willing to lay down his life to preserve Mandalore's future as well as its leadership. So, arguably, I'd say he had the best character arc of like the episode. So, there was that. Other episodes I thought were like good or fun, I think were basically, I suppose every other episode except for maybe episode 6, I guess. But now it's not to say that these episodes are bad or like let's see, really good or not. I mean, I think they were fun to watch, just by monster of the week, if you will. Granted, the first episode was more just like a basic setup of seeing monsters and where the Coven has come to now and all that stuff, the crocodile one, and just setting up like let's see, the pirates as antagonists for a future episode. But yeah, though I will admit I was not really a fan of the idea of IG-11 being brought back, which like I said before, because his death was sort of tragic and heroic, if you will. I thought it was like completed his character, but I can see why maybe they brought him back as like to replace Cara Dune, since she's not going to be in anymore, since Gina Carano, like I said earlier, Gina Carano couldn't keep her mouth shut, if you will. So I can see where why he's brought back, but that's arguably the issue I have with that episode. But other than that, it's just basic setup. It's not really too much exciting, though. It does disappoint with the whole Bo-Katan not really trying to do anything to get back the Darksaber. Let's see. I like how R5 ends up joining Mando for a bit. So you got like one of the characters from the movies, even though it feels random how he ends up getting like Pelimoto's hands. But I guess that was established before in like the Book of Boba Fett, and I think even one of the last 2 seasons of the Mandalorians, I think. But yeah, I'm just a bit surprised that he ended up being a former member of the Rebel Alliance, which, from what I could tell, we could not tell that from like when he was appeared in the movie. He's just like a random droid that just malfunctioned just before Arthur was bought. So I don't know. There's clearly some more history for this character, though I do admit he kind of randomly showed up at the last episode to help Mando at one point, disable some force fields to fight Imperial stormtroopers. So there was that. But hey, it's just like a little fun cameo. And Din Djarin has his own astromech droid now. So yeah, that's cool. So I guess, but yeah. Yeah, Pelimoto, that Ritzy mechanic girl, only really appears in that one episode. Let's see. Granted, I think that second episode is probably sour for some people because of the whole Bo-Katan ends up saving Djarin, and as a result, gets the Darksaber. But I do like the sort of tease at the end with the Mythosaurus. And it's interesting because you see it again in the last episode, when I think Grogu seemingly senses, and it seems like it senses Grogu, which makes me think that at some point, Jon Favreau, let's see, maybe when Grogu was maybe slightly older, will end up riding a Mythosaurus, and he ends up leading Mandalore because he is able to ride and tame this mighty beast. So I'm thinking that might be the case with that. So I think that's what we're going to do with that part. I definitely say the most fun of the filler episodes are probably, let's see, episode 4 and 5, where you see the Mandalorians working together to try and, let's see, save a foundling, if you will, or Paz Vizsla's son, if you will, from a giant raptor monster. As you see sort of Bo-Katan settling in, as well as seeing, let's see, Grogu's sort of backstory of how he escaped the Jedi Order with like Ahmed Best's Jedi character. So that was kind of fun seeing how that go down. And then, of course, seeing Mandalorians work together to take out pirates. So granted, the pirates weren't really that much of a challenge, and I felt like the captain got taken out quite quickly. So it's like they didn't really feel like much of a threat. But let's see, on one hand, it's got the cool factor of Mandalorians just teaming up taking down pirates, seeing how they work as a group, rather than just like individually with Din Djarin, as we haven't really seen that in the live action before. So yeah, that one was fun. But arguably, I'd probably say for the most people, the two disappointing episodes would probably be episode 6 and the final episode. Now, I'll actually say, for most part, I enjoyed the stuff we saw in the final episode, which arguably Mandalorians taking on, having a flying battle against like Imperial stormtroopers, Bo-Katan leading with a darksaber. That stuff kind of stuff's kind of cool. Mando taking on Imperial stormtroopers through the Force phaser shield things, and then sort of like a Phantom Menace style, like laser war, if you will. And then, of course, helping Grogu take on Praetorian guards, if you will, and saving him. Moff Gideon, fighting, I guess, both Din Djarin and Bo-Katan seemed fitting, and I like how he's using Electro Staff to deal with the Darksaber, if you will. But I think the controversial things with this finale is the fact that Moff Gideon's plan turns out to be cloning himself with using Grogu's blood and all that stuff, able to give his clones force sensitive powers. So it's like he wants to create an army of clones of himself with Mandalorian armor for like protection and the Jedi's force powers, if you will, to help fight off enemies. And there's himself as like the perfect vessel. Thinks that with this, he can help bring order to the galaxy, which arguably is a bit of I think for most people it was a bit of a disappointing revelation, though I can see where they came from with that idea. Granted, this might be also loosely tying into the events of Rise of Skywalker, as the Empire does some cloning that bring back Palpatine or the First Order, Final Order, whatever. But on the one hand, I will admit, I think I can see why Gideon would do that, as he seems to think of himself highly, but feels like, okay, he didn't have the Force, so it's like using the Force, having a transfer of the Force into his clones, and that way with the Mandalorian armor, he has like all the best parts of different cultures and orders that he can use to take and rule the galaxy with. I can see where he can come for that one. The biggest problem is how easily the clones end up being destroyed by Din Djarin. I feel like if perhaps maybe you had like a bit more time with the episode, a little bit longer runtime, you could have seen, these clones in action even for a little bit. And I don't mind if they are still killed off, but I don't know, at least give us more than just having the clones just explode, because it's like 3 seasons of build up for like what Moff Gideon's plans are, and it gets taken out in like a few minutes. So it's like maybe a bit more build up to this. Also, I think like the way his death was panned out seemed pretty forced. It was like screaming kind of thing as getting engulfed in flames, but it feels like I said earlier, felt like it could have been avoided. And it's like, I feel like it was like, I'm not against like Bo-Katan and Mando working together with Grogu to take him out. I just feel like the death could have been done more epically, like I suggested earlier, of like the Force push or something like that. And he gets caught in the explosions or even the ship crashing down. So I feel like that would have made it better. So, but yeah. So arguably, it's not the best, final, but it's not like I think the most offensive either, because I think there's some stuff that's nice, such as the Mandalorians now coming together, and regardless of the Darksaber, which I would admit, I was a bit surprised they destroyed that. They all agreed to forge a new thing, Mando officially adopting Grogu. Though I will admit, the ending does feel like it's like, oh, this is a finale, there's no more stuff to do with Mando. Well, we'll have to wait and see if the movie and then maybe other seasons might be able to justify that, but we'll have to wait and see. But the whole Moff Gideon stuff is now done with, so there's that. But the one episode that I will admit that seems to get everyone hates, which I will say, when I first saw it, I ended up actually enjoying it. Granted, perhaps maybe I was blinded by my nostalgia for like Clone Wars stuff, such as hearing Dooku's name, battle droids, and all that stuff. Sorry, I might be talking too long. I'm just finish. I'm just getting myself a drink. There we go. Now, I will admit, let's see, the Jack Black cameo thing, guest star, it's like a bit obvious. I don't really know much about the Lizzo, but I can see that for some people, that put them off. And yeah. Now, I think the biggest, I've seen all kinds of controversy. Those two are like the main reasons. So I can see why. Sorry, I can see why some Star Wars fans weren't exactly thrilled with those two cameos, but I think also there was stuff with the droids where, okay, see, droids and servitude have always been a bit controversial, I think, in Star Wars, but it's just like one of those things, just don't think too much about it. But this episode kind of makes you think about it, where the droid, let's see, the society works because the droids do all the work, and let's see, now granted, they like it and all that stuff, and they want to continue doing it because at the very least, it feels like they at least owe it to the humans because they let them live, especially like the battle droids, since they would have been dismantled if that's not the case. But some view this as like a form of, like, of course, fandom views this like this feels like a form of forced slavery because it's like if they're not allowed to do the work, they'll be destroyed and all that stuff. So it's like they're like basically slaves. And some, I think, have compared this to the controversial Harry Potter storyline. That's more in the books, really, about house elves who like what they're doing. Now, granted, which I will admit, I didn't really see the comparisons and thought maybe that's going a bit too far, but I can actually see why they feel like this way. But at the very least, I do like the sort of interesting fact that there's a sort of like, in some ways, one of the reasons they do this is because, let's see, this planet does offer them a bit of a chance to live in some ways because, well, other planets would have dismantled them, like from, for example, like in the form of Imperial droids, in the form of Separatist droids. They do like that, but yeah. But arguably, it's an interesting episode with some ideas about droids' rights, but it feels like the buddy cop thing and all that stuff, but it feels like it should have been in its entire own episode rather than just building up to this Mandalorian stuff, or at least more time to delve on this issues, because it's interesting how the society has a direct democracy where everyone votes and all that stuff about issues, but for example, whether or not droids should be dismantled, and they don't because it like will affect their livelihood, and they all just elect leaders, and seemingly the society is sort of utopian, but it can easily collapse if the droids themselves start to malfunction, and they themselves don't know how to do many of the works. So I could see how, let's see, well, on one hand, there's some things that work with the society, but there's also major flaws when you look down into it. And I think it's a bit interesting. Granted, perhaps this episode explored more like, okay, we allow the droids to live, but they don't necessarily have the same rights. And if we're really a direct democracy, we should also give the droids that right to vote. But that issue is never really brought up. It feels like one way they could have tackled like the whole droids' rights here is like this society realizes that while they rely on droids, they don't necessarily have the same rights as them. So, you know, give them the same rights, but that aspect is not really explored. So yeah, there's a lot going with this episode that could be interesting, but it doesn't really have the time to do so. And also the cameos with Jack Black, I think, put off a lot of people. But also Also, the fact that I think the bad guy's motivation is that he doesn't like how this captain has, like Jack Black's character has ruined the society. Goes on a bit speech about Dooku and how he's right, but it's easily taken out. So it's like the bad guy's motivation. Well, it's cool to have Dooku mentioned. It isn't like I don't feel like it's fully explained why he's fully doing this. I mean, granted, okay, he doesn't like what the man has, let's see, Jack Black's character has done to society. Perhaps he feels like he's made it, like, let's see, too reliant on droids, but at the same time, he hasn't done anything to try and make the society work without droids. But yeah, so I don't know. It feels like you could have added more motivation and rather not have him taking out quickly. But the real reason I see people hating this episode is the fact that it's there's also, I think, the goofy calamari stuff at the beginning, opening, but I think the reason most people hate this one is the loophole it has of Mando just giving Bo-Katan the Darksaber to, like, giving Bo-Katan the Darksaber with a loophole rather than actually fighting for it, because, well, that's what the second season felt like it was built up to, and it never happened. So, yeah, it just feels like things went a bit too easy to attack a character then. And I can see why they wanted to do it. Do it because Mando doesn't really want to rule Mandalore, and Bo-Katan's more fitting for that situation, but the way they got there feels like it wasn't really earned. So, yeah, overall, I definitely say I like the season for the most part, but it is definitely weaker than the first ones, and I can see why people dislike it. I can enjoy it for, like, the entertainment factor, and I even enjoy some of the stuff that we got, but it feels like it would have been better if the season was split into two, where all that stuff in the Book of Boba Fett happened here, but let's see, Ginger Jar is exiled from the Mandalorians, and then is trying to find a way to get back to Mandalore, and during the course of that, ends up clashing with Bo-Katan, and then maybe say they end up getting forced to work together for a situation, maybe having, like, I don't know, Bo-Katan eventually save the life, maybe then do the Mando Darksaber transfer thing, but not before Bo-Katan has tried to fight Din Djarin a few times to get back. And then Grogu makes his choice and comes back, and then at the end of the season, Mando sort of bathes in the water, and as a result, is Mandalorian again, but also Bo-Katan, and then at the end of the episode, building up that, let's see, both Din Djarin and Bo and Grogu are welcome back into the Watch, and then next season, have Bo-Katan and Mando, let's see, adjusting to life on the, as part of the Watch, and then maybe get to get into conflict with stuff like the pirates and all that stuff, and then have, like, of course, the armorer have Bo-Katan remove a helmet and try to unite the Mandalorians, and that's the next part of the season, like for the season 4, and then the climactic battle against Moff Gideon. I felt like if you split this and make it a bit like two storylines mixed for the Book of Boba Fett into 2 seasons, I think this might have been worked a bit better rather than the rushing it did with, like, Din Djarin already got the waters back. The waters back bathing to the waters, and then trying to recruit the Mandalorians all into 1 season and just did it as 2. I think this would have been better regarded. So, yeah, I think that's what should have happened, but it didn't. But yeah, I feel like at best you can give this season a 7 out of 10, or at worst a 5 out of 10. I think there's a lot of good stuff to enjoy, but at the same time, there's a lot of stuff I can see why people would not enjoy. But I don't think it's the worst thing ever. Maybe slightly overhated, but I don't know. But I can see why, with 2 great seasons of The Mandalorian, with, like, one that does not see perform as well as the first two. I can see how the reputation of this one became so negative, but yeah. Now, anyway, I've given my thoughts, and I'm looking forward to like the Mandalorian movie. I hope for those who end up listening enjoyed what I had to say or not. I apologize towards the end. I may have talked too much that I am not able to do so now. So I need to probably end it because I didn't give myself too much of a break. So yeah. But my overall thoughts of the season is that it's enjoyable, particularly for individual episodes and adventures, but as a whole season, it's a bit of feels like either a bit of a mess of like one goal done, now we need to do another one, as well as how easy like it was for Din Djarin to bathe, as well as Bo-Katan to get the Darksaber, and awesome return of Moff Gideon. His defeat felt a bit anticlimactic. So yeah, whether or not, now granted, whether or not the Mandalorian Grogu movie can reinvent interest in the series and the Mandoverse remains to be seen. Though I think most people have seen some of the reputation it's gotten now. But who knows? At the very least, I'm going to enjoy a Star Wars movie for my birthday, and I will see the rest of you later next time as I cover a bunch of One Piece chapters and maybe some Naruto stuff. And I'll probably also review the Mandalorian movie at some point. But for now, I am Blue Star Saber signing off. Goodbye, everyone. May the Force be with you.